Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Frock Talk. Today we're going to be examining a stunning purple silk bodice that my wonderful friend Liz gave me for my birthday. Now this one is related to the tan bodice that we examined last time and even belonged to the same woman, and I suspect she probably wore it about the same time in her life because it's also incredibly tiny, so small that it will not fit on my size 0 mannequin, and I can't show it to you actually on a physical body because it's just too small. So with that said, let's get a look at this wonderful bodice. So this bodice I'm thinking is probably right around 1900, 1905, because we do have the fitted sleeves. We don't have a lot of volume in the top of the sleeve, and then we have the pigeon front of this bodice. I know it doesn't look like a pigeon front the way it's laid out now, but that is because the waistband has been removed. And if we open it up and look inside, we can see this tiny, tiny, tiny bodice, how it had the fitted inside layer, and then it had this very loose top layer that would have been gathered down over it. So that definitely says pigeon front to me. So let's start by looking at just the fabric itself. The fabric is this wonderful like tissue weight silk. It's super, super, super light, and it has these wonderful stripes and little dots that are woven into the pattern itself. And then it is unfortunately shredding in quite a few places. We'll get down here with you guys. The interior is a very nice polished cotton. It is actually in better shape than the silk on top of it, which is the whole point. It's supposed to be the structure. And then the interior, all of the guts of this are in really great shape actually. The outside is kind of not the best. It hasn't held up as well, but the cotton interior is looking pretty good. So starting on the inside, we have a ton of bones. We have, let's see, the darts are not boned, but the side seam and the two side back seams, the center back seam, those are all boned, and they all have their original boning in its original case, and that's just fantastic. That doesn't look, oh, that's cool. So they used two different types of boning on this. They used a flat steel on the three back seams, and then they used a type that looks like it's two wires inside a casing together, and it actually looks a lot like modern hoop steel, at least the kind that they used to make it. They don't make it anymore, but it does look very similar to that. Oh, there is more steel, there is more boning in it. There's also boning here along the front opening, right where the hooks are, and that is that second type of steel. That's the kind that's the two wires inside the casing together. And I'm thinking there may have been, at one point, there was boning along the darts here, because there's some of this this green thread that doesn't seem to go to anything, but the bone along the side, but the bone along the front opening has that green thread holding it in place. So I think at one point the darts were boned, and it's been removed later on. And it looks like she wore this a ton, because there are some serious sweat stains in this thing. The whole back, like this whole area, is discolored from sweat. And when we look at the front again, under the arms, you get this kind of shredding when there's been a lot of sweat in there. Yeah, the silk is just coming apart because of all of the sweat that's been under her arms. So she wore the heck out of this. And I don't blame her. I mean, it's stunning. I would have worn the heck out of it too. As far as what the pattern would look like, there are two bust darts in the front. And wow, that's an interesting choice. Wonder why they did that. So for some reason, maybe because that's the natural waist and they didn't want extra bulk there, but the facing on the hook side, and all the hooks have been removed. The eyes are still there, but the hooks are gone. But it's on both sides of the bodice on the center front here. But they've just taken a wedge out of the facing, and it was deliberate because it's been stitched down. It's been top stitched then afterwards. So it's not something that they went back and did later on for some reason. This is something they did during the construction of the dress. But it's just this little like shark's tooth missing out of the facing on that part. And I'm betting it was to reduce bulk or something along that line. There's so many interesting little things about this bodice. So the darts have been hemmed for, I mean, not exactly hemmed, but kind of hemmed, in that they folded over the raw edge and then stitched it down around the outside, but they didn't double fold it, they just folded it back once. So, I mean, there's still raw edge exposed, but, I mean, it would have looked pretty nice once it was all pressed out and everything, but that's interesting that they would have done that. But they went through all that trouble on the darts, and then on the seams in the back, they didn't do any sort of treatment on them at all. They did the cuts in the seams so that it would lie flat, but they didn't treat the raw edge at all. They just left it raw. So the construction on this bodice is not super complicated at all, but it is very well done. It's nicely put together. The top layer hangs loose until the side seam. It's sewn into the side seam here. The neckline here is bound with just a little bit of purple silk. It's not it doesn't have a facing or anything like that. It's just bound with a bit of silk. On the bias, it looks like, well, maybe not. Nope, that's on the straight grain. So not even bias tape around the neckline, it's just straight grain. So one of my favorite things about this bodice is these sleeves. So let me give you some hot sleeve action, because we can see the difference between the sleeve here, which has lost its cuff. It's a finished sleeve. The bottom edge is all finished off with a facing in there, and then it still has this band attached. But originally it would have had the same treatment as this one, where it has the band attached to this wonderful ruched layer of silk. It's not quite an organza. It's super lightweight, but it's not quite an organza, so I'm not sure exactly what you would call it. But it's super fluffy, super lightweight, and because it's coming apart kind of right here, you can see the tiny little gathering stitches. It's not gathered in any particular way to create this effect. It's just gathered down with a single line of stitches. So there's not any sort of like fancy pleating or anything going on there. It's just gathering stitches. And then we have the cuff at the wrist, which would have looked the same as the band above the gathers there. So it would have looked something like that when it was actually being worn. This purple silk on the bands is not exactly the same color as the silk of the rest of the garment. This may have been just silk ribbon and not fabric that they used, because on the inside it is lined with that silk, but interestingly it's the wrong side of the silk. Huh. Now we're gonna look at the back of this. Silk is definitely loose from the lining here in the back. It's not sewn down it's not sewn into the seams in the back. What we are seeing is just a tiny bit of pleating here to give it some interest. And then they've tacked down a little bar here, I guess to cover the gathering stitches, except that the gathering stitches are still showing. which is pretty funny. There's some expert level sewing in this, and then there's some that's just like, tack it on and forget about it. I just want to get this thing done. So someone probably came in and maybe they were trying to update it to be more fashionable for the new styles. Maybe it was a hand-me-down and someone was trying to change it up for the new wearer. But there's some interesting choices happening with this, because this little bar here is tacked on with green thread. Not with purple, not with cream, but like forest green. So it's really visible, and it's like this really just awful whip stitch. I mean, the stitches are going every which direction, and they're not uniform at all. They're much more closely packed on the bottom, and then on the top they're like a 1/4 inch apart. It's just wild. So this was definitely done at a later point by someone different from who constructed the original bodice, because that's just, it's totally different craftsmanship and that kind of a thing. Here again we see the two different sides of the sleeve. This one without the cuff treatment and this one with. It's so interesting that we get a fully finished sleeve and then this cuff was kind of just like stuck on top. So I'm wondering then if this cuff was a later addition and didn't come with the original bodice, that this was something added later, because that would explain kind of why they used the ribbon. Oh, you know what? I bet I know what happened. I think they took the original facing, because the facing is missing. I think they used that on the inside of this ribbon, and I think they made the cuffs to make it more fashionable. Ha! That would explain that. Ah! Tricky, clever people. Okay. I get you. I see what you've done. I'm here for it. I've done that. Yeah, I'm 99% sure that that's what happened, is that they took the facing off of the bottom of that, or the waistband, or whatever they had going on down there, and they used it to create these fashionable little poof cuffs to make it a little fancier. And that's why they used the ribbon, and that's why they used this different fabric. They were updating it for whoever was wearing it next. And that's wonderful. I love that. That's so lovely. What a fun little bodice. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's look at this beautiful purple bodice, please be sure to hit that like button below. And if you want to see more Frock Talk, sewing adventures, costume events, and historical costuming adjacent goodness, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!